Chapter 5. What? The ungodly sounds echoed across the library silent saloon bar of the Flying Swan, rattling the optics and jarring the patrons from their contemplation of the racing dailies. Neville, the part-time barman, clapped his hands about his ears and swore from between freshly clenched teeth. Nicholas Roger Raffles Rathbone, currently serving his time as local paper lad, stood before the Captain Laser alien attack machine, his feet at 3 of the clock and his shoulders painfully hunched in his bid to defend planet Earth from its never-ending stream of cosmic cousins ever bent upon conquest, doom and destruction. His right forefinger rattled away at the neutron bomb release button, and a bead of perspiration formed upon his ample brow. Go on, my son, go on! Little streamers of coloured light, like some residue from a third-rate fireworks box, flew up the bluely tinted video screen to where the horde of approaching spacecraft, appearing for all the world like so many stuffed olives, dipped and weaved. What? Young Nick levelled his cherry-red boot at the machine, damaging several of his favourite doors. Neville watched the performance with a face of despair. He too had made that gesture of defiance with an equal lack of success. The boy Nick dug deeply into his denim pockets for more small change, but found only a pound note, whose serial number corresponded exactly with one which had lain not long before in Norman's secret cash box beneath his counter. He turned his back momentarily upon his humming adversary and bounced over to the bar counter. Give us change for quick then, Nev. Neville viewed the diminutive figure with the lime-green coiffure. I cannot give out change, he said maliciously. You will have to buy a drink. OK then, half shandy and plenty 2 bobs in a change. The captain awaits. Neville drew off a mere trickle of ale into the glass and topped it up from the drips tray. We've no lemonade, he sneered. No sweat, said Nick. Neville noticed, as he passed the flat half-pint across the gleaming bar top, that the boy's right forefinger drummed out a continual tattoo upon an imaginary neutron bomb release button. Accepting the pound note, he rang up Noel's sale and scooped out a fistful of pennies and halfpennies and a 10-bob piece. Sorry I can't let you have more than a couple of florins, he told the bouncing boy. We are a little down on silver this morning. The boy shrugged. No, sir. He was well acquainted with the old adage about a prophet being without honour in his own land, and he made a mental note that he would always in future take his perks in silver before settling in for lunchtime's cosmic warfare. Without further ado, he pocketed his 10-bob piece, swept up his pennies, pushed his half-pint pointedly aside, and jogged back to the humming machine. Pooley and O'Malley entered the Flying Swan. My God save all here, said the Irishman, as more ptoing rent the air, and a pox upon those who invented such hellish works. Raffles Rathbone heard not a word of this. He was hunched low, aiding the captain in his bid to defeat Earth's attackers. His face was contorted into the kind of expression which made Joseph Carey Merrick such a big attraction in the Victorian sideshows. His right forefinger twitched in a localised St. Vitus dance, and his body quivered as if charged with static electricity. Neville ground his teeth, loosening yet another expensive filling, and tore his eyes away from the loathsome spectacle and towards his approaching patrons. And what is your pleasure, gentlemen? He asked. Pooley hoisted himself up onto his favourite stool. 2 pints of very best, bar lord, he said. My companion is in the chair. Making much of his practised wrist action, Neville drew off 2 pints of the very best. He eyed O'Malley with only the merest suspicion as the Irishman paid up without a fuss, guessing accurately that it was some debt of honour. His eyebrows were raised somewhat, however, to the shabby and mud-bespattered appearance of the 2 drinkers. He thought to detect something slightly amiss. I think to detect something slightly amiss, he observed. John drew deeply upon his pint. You find me a puzzled man, said he with some sincerity. Pooley nodded. I also am puzzled, he said, tapping his chest. The part-time barman stood silently a moment, hoping for a little elaboration, but when it became apparent that none was to be forthcoming, he picked up a pint glass and began to polish it. You've had no luck yet with the tablement, the horror, said O'Malley, gesturing over his shoulder towards the video machine. Neville accelerated his polishing. None whatever, he snarled. I've tried the hot soup through the vent, the bent washer in the slot, assault with a deadly weapon. I've even tried simply to cut the lead, but the thing is welded into the wall. Why not pull its fuse at the mains box? Pooley asked. Neville laughed hollowly. My first thought. Our friends from the brewery have thought of that. I have pulled every fuse in the place, but it still runs. It works off some separate power supply, which doesn't even register on the electric meter. It cannot be switched off. Night and day it runs. I can hear it in my room, humming and humming. I swear that if something is not done soon, I will tender my resignation, if only to save my sanity. Steady on, said Jim. Look at it, Neville commanded. It's an obscenity, an abomination, an insult. He placed one hand over his heart and the other palm downward on bar top. Once, said he, once, if you will recall, one could sit in his pub enjoying the converse of good friends well met. Once in a corner booth meditate upon such matters as took your fancy. Little you will remember, and correct me if I'm wrong or sinking into melancholy, little broke the harmony of the place but for the whisper of the feathered flight. Once... Enough, said Jim. Hold hard now, you're bringing a lump to my throat which is causing some interference to my drinking. I'm not a man to panic, said Neville, which all knew to be a blatant lie. But this thing is wearing down my resistance. I cannot take much more, I can tell you. O'Malley noted well the desperation upon the barman's face, and felt sure that there was a definite possibility of financial advancement in it. You need to play a shrewd game with one of those mechanical lads, he said, when he thought the time was right. A firm hand is all they understand. Neville's eyes strayed towards the jukebox, which had not uttered a sound in these 10 years, once O'Malley had applied a firm hand to its workings. It seemed a thing of little menace now compared with the video machine, but Neville could vividly recall the agonies he had gone through at the time. You feel that you might meet such a challenge? He asked with an even voice. Child's play, said O'Malley, which made Pooley choke upon his ale. Good show, Neville smiled bravely, and pulled 2 more pints. These are on the ass, he said. Old Pete, whose hearing was as acute as his right arm sound, overheard the last remark. Good morning, Jim, he said, rising upon his stick. Fine day, is it not? It started poorly, said O'Malley, but it's beginning to perk up. Cheers. Been to the allotment, then? The ancient inquired, placing his empty glass upon the counter and indicating the mud-besmirched condition of the 2 secret golfers. Waiting, said John, making motions with an ethereal shovel. Spring up overnight, those lads. Old Pete nodded sagely. It's strange, said he, what things spring up on an allotment patch overnight. Take my humble plot, for instance. You'll never guess what I found on it the other day. Pooley, who had the kind of intuition regarding these things, kept silent. Golf tee, said old Pete in a harsh stage whisper. Large rum over here, said O'Malley, rattling Pete's glass upon the bar. How unexpected, said the wily old bastard. Bless you, boys, bless you. O'Malley drank a moment in silence. Now tell me, Pete, said he, when the ancient had taken several sips upon his Freeman's, how spins the world for you at the present hour? Old Pete grunted noncommittally. It's a case of mustn't grumble, I suppose. No news, then? Nothing out the ordinary or untoward in the go? Not that I can think of. Did you have anything in mind? No, nothing. O'Malley made a breezy gesture. It's just, well, to be frank, Pete, it's well known that little if anything going on in the borough ever slips by you, as your present drink will bear testimony to. I just thought you might have some little snippet of interest up your 4-button sleeve. You couldn't be a little bit more specific, said Pete, draining his glass. So much happens thereabouts, as you know. To keep one's finger upon the pulse is a thirsty business. O'Malley looked towards Pooley, who shrugged. Same again, please, Neville, said John to the part-time barman, who had been hovering near at hand, ears waggling. All the way round, all the way. The honours were done, and to Neville's disgust, old Pete drew his benefactors away to a side table, beneath which his dog Chips lay feigning slumber. The 3 men seated themselves. Would I be right in assuming that you have something on your mind, O'Malley? The ancient asked. It is but a trivial matter, O'Malley lied. Hardly worth wasting your valuable time with, but I confess it causes me some level of perplexity. Ask on then, John. You are 2 drinks to credit, and I am by no means a hard man to deal with. Then I shall get straight to the point. Have you seen a suspicious-looking character skulking around on or near the sacred soil of our allotments? Old Pete nodded. Of course I have, he answered, both there and elsewhere. Wearing a grey overalls suit, sallow complexion, high cheekbones. Looks like a young Jack Palance. The very same. I've seen several. Oh dear, said Pooley.
more than one. At least 4. Take my warning, they have the mark of officialdom upon them. Saw one last week down by the cut, one yesterday on the corner of Ealing Road. There's one drinking this very minute in the far corner over by the gents' bog.
What? O'Malley's head spun in the direction of the gents. There in the darkened corner stood a sinister figure in a grey coverall suit. His features were blurry in the dun light, but it was almost certainly the same individual that he and Pooley had spied out on the allotment not half an hour earlier. As O'Malley watched, the figure turned his back upon them and strode through the door into the gents. "All right, Pete," said O'Malley, turning to the ancient. "Who's he?" Old Pete shrugged.
"There you have me, I'm afraid. And first I saw them, I took them for council workers. It's some kind of instruments mounted on a tripod and appeared to be marking the ground, but I never got close enough to question them. They slipped away into side roads, rough down alleyways upon my approach. This is the nearest that I have so far come to one of them."
"But you are sure there are more than one?" Pooley asked.
"I've seen as many as 3 of them together at one time, as like as the proverbial peas in a pod. Suspicious, I call it."
"I shall go and question him." O'Malley rose from his chair.
"Best wait till he comes out," Jim suggested. "It's hardly sporting to corner a man in the bog." "Do it now while you haven't cornered," said old Pete. "They're a sly crowd. Never saw that fellow enter the Swan, and I was the first man in."
"That settles it," said John, drawing up his cuffs. "I shall have it out with him." Without further word he crossed the bar and pushed open the door to the gents. It closed gently behind him and a long minute passed. Pooley looked up at the Guinness clock and watched the second hand sweeping the dial.
"Do you think he's all right?" he whispered.
Old Pete nodded.
"O'Malley knows how to handle himself. It's well known he's a grand master in the deadly fighting arts of D-Mac."
"It is much spoken of, certainly," said Jim with some deliberation. As the second hand passed the 12 for the 3rd time, Pooley gripped the table and pulled himself to his feet. "Something is wrong," he said.
"He said he was going to have it out with a fellow. Don't be so hasty. Give him another minute."
"I don't know. You say you never saw him come in. Maybe he has several of his chums in there. I don't like the feel of this." Old Pete's dog Chips, who had not liked the feel of this from the word gore, retreated silently between the legs of his ancient master. Jim was across the carpet and through the bog doorway in a matter of seconds. Once inside, he froze in his tracks. His breath hung in his lungs, uncertain of which way it had been travelling, and his eyes bulged unpleasantly in their sockets. Before him stood John O'Malley, perspiration running freely down his face in grimy streaks. His tie hung over his shoulder, college scarf fashion, and he swayed to and fro upon his heels. O'Malley stared at Pooley, and Pooley stared at O'Malley.
"Did he come out?"
O'Malley's voice was a hoarse whisper. Pooley shook his head.
"Oh, he must be still here then."
Pooley nodded. "But he's not." Pooley was uncertain whether to shake or nod over this. "There's a terrible smell of creosote in here," he said. O'Malley pushed past him and lurched back into the bar, leaving Pooley staring about the tiled walls. Above him was an air vent a mere 6 inches across. The one window was heavily bolted from the inside, and the 2 cubicle doors stood open, exposing twin confessionals, each as empty as a proverbial vessel, but making no noise whatsoever. There was no conceivable mode of escape but by the single door which led directly into the bar. Pooley gave his head a final shake, turned slowly upon his heel, and numbly followed O'Malley back into the saloon.